Greetings, thanks for joining us again here today at stevedeace.com. Deace's Daily Diatribe continues our 9-part series taking a look at the 9 people that we think are the most likely to be on the ballot come February 6, 2012 in Iowa's First in the Nation caucuses. And what's different about this series is we're just taking a look at the weaknesses of each of these candidates. I mean, all of us have weaknesses. That's right. You can blog about that. Deace is willing to admit, I've got weaknesses as well. That's your headline tomorrow for the Gutless Anonymous bloggers. Deace finally comes clean. No, listen, seriously, all of us have weaknesses. There's only one of us that hasn't, and his name's Jesus. He's not on the ballot, which means the rest of us, those of us doing the analysis of those who are running for offices, all of us in this whole thing, including you, the voter, all of us have weaknesses. Often in life, our opponents, our adversaries, our competitors get ahead by exploiting those weaknesses. And that's why we're taking a look at those weaknesses here in this series, because that's exactly what each of the candidates that we are previewing, each of their opponents is going to try to do. And that's what they're going to try to do to their opponents as well. So whoever does the best job of overcoming their own weaknesses, while at the same time exploiting the weaknesses of their opponent, is more than likely going to be very happy come caucus night on February 6th. So we're taking a look at each of these candidates. We're running down the list in alphabetical order. And today we're going to take a look at our second Minnesotan in the presidential race, and that is former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. Now, I think he's got 2 big weaknesses. Number one is the presence of former, or current I should say, and his former colleague in Minnesota and current Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. There's just not room for 2 people trying to be conservative from Minnesota in this race. So I think the Iowa straw poll is going to eliminate one of those 2. I think either Pawlenty or Bachmann would also be attractive as VP candidates. So I think really there's huge stakes in this between those 2 candidates between now and the Iowa straw poll. I think one of them's out after the Iowa straw poll, depending on where they finish, either Bachmann or Pawlenty. So that's one weakness that Pawlenty has, is he's trying to occupy ground that someone who has more money, higher name ID, and more charisma than he has is trying to occupy. That's not an easy sell to make. And that leads us to the other big weakness that we think Tim Pawlenty has. And that is that Tim Pawlenty is just sort of, you know what I mean? Just sort of, You know, I mean, I spent some time with him at the Family Leader Presidential Lecture Series. Just a really decent-hearted guy. And you can tell his wife just adores him, and that's a plus. I mean, she knows him better than anybody else. Decent-hearted guy. If you support Tim Pawlenty, I don't think you have to worry about getting up and reading the newspaper and think, oh, snap, what did he do last night? He's not going to morally embarrass you. But he's also not really overly impressive. There's not really any issues. You go back to a candidate we did yesterday, Ron Paul. You know, those of you that consider yourselves Christian conservatives, you really disagree with Ron Paul on a few things. But you really agree with Ron Paul on a few things as well. At least there's something. He's got a calling card. If you look at all these other candidates, they have a calling card. Michelle Bachmann, Tea Party beauty queen. I mean, and that's her calling card. You take a look at Haley Barbour, governor of a conservative state. You take a look at Ron Paul, audit the Fed, end the welfare state, bring the troops home. Mike Huckabee, Christian conservative, very eloquent speaker. You could run down the list of all of these candidates. They have something that defines them. I don't think Tim Pawlenty does. He's not really bad on anything. You know, he's pro-life, but he's one of those pro-life with exceptions guys, which really means he's just for less pro-choice. He's got a pretty good record, but nothing that really blows you away. And when you hear him in person, there's not really one issue he just grabs by the jugular, takes a hold of it, and says, that's the one we're going to storm the Bastille on. He just sort of exists. He's sort of a less well-known, less wealthy version of George W. Bush. I mean, I don't think he's a liberal, but I don't think there's really any particular issue that he really wants to challenge the system on. You remember the old John Madden football game, and they used to give you the cards with the scouting reports on all the players, and all their attributes are listed 1 through 10? Well, if you did that with Tim Pawlenty, he'd have a whole bunch of 6s and 7s. But he wouldn't really have any 9s or 10s. And so he needs to stand out from the rest of the field. He's not going to win the Iowa caucuses via a war of attrition. If he tries to do that, he's going to get swallowed whole by far more charismatic candidates, like a Mike Huckabee if he gets in, or a Michelle Bachmann, or a Newt Gingrich. He's got to find a niche. What is his niche? Why is he running? And I think he has to define that based on issues. There's got to be one or two issues that he just grabs a hold of and says, these are the ones I'm laying the smack down on. These are the hills I'm going to die on. So far he hasn't done that. And I think that explains why he languishes in a lot of these polls. And if he doesn't do that, well, he's not going to have to worry about overcoming his weaknesses in the Iowa caucuses because he won't survive past the straw poll before we even get there. Thanks for joining us today at stevedeace.com. You're welcome to email us, steve@stevedeace.com. Also find us on Facebook and at Twitter at Steve_Deace. God bless.